and welcome to another episode of our employment podcast. My name's Ashley Dibb and I'm a paralegal in the employment team, and I'm joined by co-host Andrew Halpin, who is a partner in the employment team. In today's episode we're going to be talking about mediation, and we're joined by Gabriela Hammond, who is the head of HR Consultancy here at Forbes. So Gabriela, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. I joined Forbes in back end of 2022 after a 20 plus year career in internal HR. So I came in to head up the consultancy division, and that division works predominantly with clients of the employment team to cover off people initiatives, people issues, strategic elements, day-to-day ER issues, and all elements to do with people within their business.
And I understand that as part of that role you've recently become an accredited mediator. Can you just tell us a little bit about what that entailed?
Sure, yeah, so it was identified as a requirement really, excuse me, because we had clients asking about the service, what could we do to help them solve conflict within the business. So I undertook a period of training, which was quite an extensive course on mediation to become accredited, and the reason why mediators have to do that, or it's certainly advised for them to do that, is there's a lot that can go wrong in a mediation. So the training covers that and makes sure that you can work through that.
And maybe just for those who don't know much about mediation, do you want to just give a summary of what it is? Okay,
so mediation really is getting the parties together who are in conflict with each other. So that can be a one-on-one, or it can be a group conflict, or a group resolution that's needed, and it gets them talking about the issue rather than it being a resolution that's put upon them or decided for them. They're involved in the process, so they mediate themselves really, and the mediator, the accredited mediator, is the facilitator to help them work through it. But it's the resolutions that come from mediation are focused from the people themselves, which is why it works so well.
And is it right to say all parties have to consent to mediation?
Yeah, definitely. It's a voluntary process, so someone shouldn't be cajoled or forced into it, and it has to be them themselves taking part and agreeing to do it. Otherwise, what you tend to find is they don't believe in the process, they don't have ownership of the resolution, and it falls down.
And in terms of managers who might be listening and say, I'm not wasting my time, not doing mediation, it's fluffy HR nonsense. What would you say to them in terms of the pros of it?
I think they have to take a look at the problems that the conflict is causing within their department, and that will only grow. It only takes a small issue to build within the team, and if you've got a team of people, that conflict between two people can spread. And the reason why mediation is a useful tool is it can nip that in the bud. Meaning it doesn't grow and it doesn't end up affecting efficiencies, productivity, or end up with someone leaving the business.
Because I think as well, it's a lot of conversations we have with managers, it tends to be when there's a conflict, they'll go, they're the least valuable person, the relationships have broken down, but from an employment law perspective, that doesn't really bite unless there's absolute breakdown and things are falling apart and the wheels are coming off. You have to find ways to resolve it.
Yeah, and it can serve as a product to enforce that you have tried as a business.
Yes.
And you have tried as a manager in a team, that you've done everything that you possibly can to alleviate the concerns, alleviate the conflict, which is obviously just shows that your intent was there in the first place.
Okay. How do mediation come about then, again, for managers if they're thinking about it? At what stage or stages should it be implemented or conducted?
Okay, so there's two schools of thought really on that. One, it can start as the informal stage before a formal grievance process to try and mean that you don't end up at a grievance. Or it can be post grievance. So there's a grievance decision been given on a situation, but one or two of the parties, because that's a decision that's been imparted on them, they may not understand, they might not be bought into it. So you can get the parties together post-grievance to examine the grievance decision and really discuss it and come to some agreement.
Yeah.
What it shouldn't be is mid-process, because if it's mid-process, there's something you're waiting for, and there's a decision. So the parties, the people concerned, wouldn't really be bought into it.
And how, again, put you on the spot, but how often do you find it works? Because, again, if there's been someone's gone as far as raising a grievance or been disciplined, there's going to be some bad blood, going to be some frustration, dislike for, we'll just take it as two people, dislike for one another. Once you've gone through that mediation process or get them round the table, how do you ensure that that's followed up? And
so, statistically, I think that the stats tell us that 80% of mediations are a success.
Okay.
But there's different degrees of success. So even if maybe there aren't a whole host of resolutions or agreements or commitments developed, and technically you would deem that as unsuccessful, even just going through the process can get the parties talking. So it might not be a tick in terms of, yes, this has been 100% successful, but you've broken ground and you've made some inroads. So I would say all times there is some element of success.
Okay. And who is responsible for the mediation? So once again, it's been conducted and agreement in inverted commas has been reached. Who is then responsible for managing that and ensuring that it continues?
Well, them themselves. Really, at the end of the mediation, you develop an agreement, and although it's a document and you sign it and all parties go away with it, it's not legally binding. But because you've been through the process and you've got the ownership, it's in their best interests to continue. The mediator will do a follow-up after so many weeks to see how the process has gone, but really, it's the parties themselves who have ownership for it.
Okay. And any tips for line managers if they've not conducted the mediation, and say you've gone in and done it and you've got a plan, what should line managers be attempting to do? Well,
because it's a hugely confidential process, there are some occasions where you ask the parties, can we share this resolution and let your manager know or let the HR team know. Sometimes they say no if it's a really emotive subject, but 9 times out of 10 that's been shared. So there's no harm with a manager picking up on that and saying how are things, how are you finding it, and just to reinforce the message.
Right.
So if a client has been through the mediation process, they've got a plan in place, and then say a year or so later everything breaks down again, what options are available to them then at that stage?
Okay, so a remediation is an option. Wouldn't be as detailed or as lengthy because you're reinforcing and just rediscussing what's been the issue secondary. If the parties think, well, we've done it once, I don't want to do it again, that's obviously their call because it's got to be voluntary. But it really would be for the manager or the HR department or whoever to just dig out the agreement that was created if it's been shared publicly. And just go through it with the parties and just say, this is what you agreed to, how has it fallen down, how can we reinvigorate it, and what can we do differently?
Because it could result, couldn't it, in a further disciplinary, couldn't it? If the mediation is broken down, it's one party, they could be failure to follow.
It could, although obviously because it's mutually agreed and it's confidential and it's not legally binding, it depends what's happened. So you wouldn't be able to rely on you did not do this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to investigate and potentially take you down poor performance because it was an informally created agreement.
Yeah. But thankfully that's not something we see a lot of.
No.
It's once that mediation has been done.
Because it's future focused, it really relies on the parties themselves thinking, I need to do this because I want my life at this company to be happy. I want to be happy within work, so I'm going to stick to it.
Okay.
And obviously in some situations when mediation is needed, it may come off the back of grievances, disciplinaries, as we were saying before. Obviously, in that situation, when many people have been involved in previous processes, it may not be suitable for the line managers to then be involved in the mediation itself. So that is when you can go out to assist. Just in terms of you going out to clients and assisting in the mediation, what would that look like?
Okay, so typically we get a referral from the HR department, and within that referral is a brief summary of the situation as they see it. But often what you find when you actually start talking to the parties, that situation is different and can vary. So when I go in to do a mediation, to hold a mediation, invariably it's two parties. So what you do is speak to them both individually for a good period of time to really hear the matter from their perspective. And that holds a twofold reason. You find out what's going on, but also you start to build rapport with the parties, because mediation is all about trust. They have to trust me to have an impartial and unbiased view. So it's not about making decisions or finding out what's gone on to make my own mind up, because that's not what my role is. After you've held the individual meetings, then if they're still in agreement, you move to a joint session with both parties in the room. And again, when they've been through the issue with you, they've clarified it in their own mind, so they start to then relate to others. And gradually through the mediation process, the mediator backs off a little and lets the two parties together start talking, and that's how they end up coming to their own agreements. The mediator's role is just to facilitate that and to help them along the way, but not help them make up the resolutions, because it's not my decision, it's not my thoughts about how I may help them. And that's really difficult, because certainly coming from an HR background, you want to help people, you want to help them navigate through. So you really have to sit back, because how I think I might solve that solution might not be right for them. So it's their call. And at the end of that session, and that session will take as long as it needs to take, and can reschedule if it's a really lengthy or emotive one, the two parties themselves agree 3 or 4 resolutions that they're going to work to and stick to for the future.
And after that has been agreed and you have those resolutions, do you check back in at any point to see how things are going? Or?
Yeah, so typically within sort of 4 to 6 weeks, it's just a brief, usually via email or phone call check-in with each party, just to say, how have the last few weeks gone? Have you been able to work on these areas? Is it working? What do you need to do? And invariably it's, we're working through them. It's been slow, but it's made a difference.
In terms, really interested, the last mediation I did actually was a disaster. Probably because I'm not an accredited mediator, but two parties, it was a grievance raised, and they were clearly unhappy, despite both agreeing to go to mediation. The person who'd made the complaint was clearly unhappy with the findings that they didn't find effectively in his favour of what he was alleging the individual had done. So when I started the mediation, he effectively attempted to rehash his grievance. He was really upset, really frustrated, and lots of stuff came out. And in the end, the mediation was a complete disaster. But how, again, for managers who might think, oh, well, we'll stick mediation down, that'll tick that box. It's got to be a bit more nuanced than that, hasn't it? There's got to be proper focus and serious consideration. So what kind of things, to avoid my war story, should managers be doing and to assist you?
Okay, so the mediation is future focused. So you've obviously got to have what's happened before in mind, but you almost can't dwell on it. So you examine what the situation is, but you have to draw the parties back in the meeting to stop referring to what's gone on. And it's okay, we realise that's happened, we can't change the past, it's happened, but it's how we move on and what could we all be doing differently to mean that is not parked, but it's there, it's happened, but let's do something different in the future. Okay. To move things on. But it's important to realise that not all situations lend themselves to mediation. If there are certain elements at play that the mediator thinks, no, this situation isn't going to work, and that could be that one party has more of a hold over the other party, so they hold all the cards. That's not going to work, because not all the parties aren't there equally. So that can tend to happen when you've got a manager and an employee, but not all the time. If the manager's proactive enough to not hold the cards of I am your manager and you will do this, then it can still go ahead and it can still work.
And would it be advisable if a manager is handling a grievance, a disciplinary, whatever it may be, and they're coming to the outcome stage and they're thinking, right, mediation might be an option, would it be worth picking up the phone to you beforehand just to say, look, this is what we're thinking?
Yeah. I think just sounding it out to make sure that if that is in your mind, that the situation that you've got would be worth mediation.
Okay. And final query from me. Obviously, we've touched a lot on their mediation, which happens, I suppose, the majority of the time, which falls out from a process. Again, if a manager has 2 employees who are just at loggerheads, so we know it happens. You've had the informal conversations. You may, have done formal things in the past. You've raised it in appraisals, but it's still there bubbling away. There's nothing to stop a manager pulling 2 people together, is there, in the event there's no formal process to say, look, this is what I'm thinking about?
No, mediation doesn't just have to come from a formal disciplinary or a grievance. It can literally be there's a conflict, or there's miscommunications, or something's happening within the team. It's not got to the stage where there's a performance issue, but it's clearly having an effect, and it's affecting the engagement and the employee engagement and the factors within the team. No, it can still be a really good option.
And there's more and more, case law now and legislation that is the supportive measure. And mediation is only going to become more involved and more engaged.
Yeah, and that's what we're starting to see.
Is it?
Is clients looking for different solutions to be able to show themselves, and not just show themselves, but represent that they are wanting to have a team that work well together.
That's been really helpful, Gabby. And just, I suppose, one final thing from me that I'm keen on again is we've touched on what you need to do. Obviously, things for managers to look into, but there's nothing stopping you training managers on things to look for, going in, line manager training type of thing? Yeah,
so I can't deliver training for mediation, but what I can deliver in for clients is mediation awareness.
Okay.
So the pros and cons, how it works, some examples, case studies, and things like that I find helpful.
Right. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you.
And just to end things, we've introduced a new feature to our podcast. So if for our next guest, we want to know if there's a question you'd like us to ask them.
Oh, right, okay. I suppose I'm always interested in how someone's got to where they are. So about their career and what would they do differently.
Perfect.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Gabby, for joining us. Hope you found it useful, and here's to wishing everyone a happy and successful 2024. See you next time.